Today, good afternoon, everyone. Today, our class will be on acute rheumatic fever. Acute rheumatic fever and rheumatic heart disease. So, classical description of acute rheumatic fever, what in layman term we will tell is, it licks the joint and bites the heart. I'll be discussing the meaning for this uh, sentence in the further slides. But classical layman description for acute rheumatic fever will be it licks the joint and bites the heart. So introduction. So it is the leading cause of acquired heart disease in our setting, and its incidence is from 5 to 15 years, and there is a worldwide prevalence, but the prevalence in India is even more high due to various social and environmental conditions like poor hygiene and inadequate hand washing. And these are some of the causes which predispose to acute rheumatic fever. So 50% of all cardiovascular disease in developing countries is because of this acute rheumatic fever leading to rheumatic heart disease. And it is also reason for 50% of cardiovascular admissions. So Indian incidence is 0.5%. So why there is increased incidence in developing countries? So predisposing factors, as I said before, it's because of low socioeconomic status, overcrowding, poor medical care, and at the same time decreased incidence in developed countries is due to shift in group A streptococcal strains from rheumatogenic to non-rheumatogenic. That's why in developed countries, its incidence is even more less than developing countries. In developing countries, group A streptococcal strains which are rheumatogenic is more common than non-rheumatogenic. So what causes acute rheumatic fever? The agent responsible for acute rheumatic fever is group A beta hemolytic streptococci. The rheumatogenic serotypes are 1, 3, 5, 6, and 18. So the population which is mostly affected by this acute rheumatic fever, as I said before, the peak incidence is from 5 to 15 years. Males and females are equally affected, and genetic predisposition also is there. So environment, it's mostly occurring in winter seasons, and wherever there is poverty and overcrowding is there, acute rheumatic fever incidence also increases. So disease caused by group A streptococci. So normally it causes pharyngitis, impetigo, pyoderma, pneumonia, necrotizing fasciitis, and rheumatic fever, glomerulonephritis, osteomyelitis, scarlet fever and erysipelas, and toxic shock syndrome. So pathogenesis behind this is it causes non-separative complications of group A streptococcal pharyngitis, latent period of 1 to 3 weeks, seen a delayed immune response caused by antibody cross-reactivity. The body mounts a immune response against these antigens. The antibody which has to eliminate these antigens, instead of doing that, they will go and attack our own body. That's why they will say like acute rheumatic fever is also, the pathogenesis is also autoimmune phenomenon. Our own antibodies attack our heart, joints, skin, and brain, basal ganglia. The serotypes, M types, which are behind this are 1, 3, 5, 6, 18, and 24. So cytotoxic, there are some other theories like cytotoxic theory and antibody response to collagen. So untreated group A beta hemolytic streptococcal infection is the commonest antecedent event that precipitates an attack of ARF. That's why if a child is developing acute rheumatic fever, we have to put the child on penicillin prophylaxis to prevent the pharyngitis caused by this group A beta hemolytic streptococcal. Because once he acquires the infection, again The patient will develop acute rheumatic fever. Again, the patient might develop rheumatic heart disease. There will be worsening of the disease. That's why we put the child on penicillin prophylaxis to prevent this infection changing into pharyngitis. Just harboring an infection is not a problem, but developing a pharyngitis and that leading to acute rheumatic fever is the problem. So we have to put the child on penicillin prophylaxis. So about 50% of the children with acute rheumatic fever will suffer from rheumatic heart disease. So clinical manifestations and diagnosis. So the Jones criteria, which is updated in 1992, which has 5 major criteria, 4 minor. The diagnosis of acute rheumatic fever needs 2 majors or 1 major and 2 minor with evidence in the basis of either microbiology or serology of recent group A beta hemolytic streptococcal infection. Why Jones criteria? There is no clinical or lab finding is pathognomic for acute rheumatic fever. So T. Duckett Jones in 1944 to aid diagnosis and limit over diagnosis, he came up with this Jones criteria. So it minimized missing an opportunity for the safety net of secondary prophylaxis. So this is the recent revised Jones criteria. As we can see, initial ARF is diagnosed by 2 major manifestations or 1 major plus 2 minor manifestations, as I before told. But a recurrent ARF can be diagnosed with 2 major or 1 major plus 2 minor or even 3 minor. This is one important point. Even 3 minor in a recurrent 3 minor also can be enough to diagnose the recurrent ARF. But for initial ARF, there has to be at least 2 major manifestations or 1 major plus 2 minor manifestations. Now they have come with newer guidelines like low risk population, high risk population. So down you can see the low risk population, single asterisk they have given. The low risk population are those with acute rheumatic fever incidence less than or equal to 2 per 1 lakh school age children. Like you have to note, like it's acute rheumatic fever incidence. Whereas all age, this acute rheumatic fever incidence is for school age children. Whereas rheumatic heart disease prevalence is for all age children less than or equal to 1 per 1000 population per year. This is very, very important because based on this only we are diagnosing now. So our Indian population, our Pondicherry population, they come under high risk population only, but low risk population are those with acute rheumatic fever incidence less than or equal to 2 per 1 lakh school age children, or all age rheumatic heart disease prevalence of less than or equal to 1 per 1000 population per year. So in a low risk population, major criteria we are taking it as carditis. It can be either clinical or subclinical. Arthritis, only polyarthritis, chorea, erythema maceratum, and subcutaneous nodules. Whereas in a moderate and high risk population, major criteria they are taking it as carditis is the same, clinical, subclinical. But in arthritis, they are also including monoarthritis. Whereas in a low risk population, low risk population, major criteria is only polyarthritis. Whereas in a moderate and high risk population, monoarthritis and polyarthralgia also come in the arthritis group. So other 3 things are common only. Major criteria, the only difference is in low risk population, arthritis group only polyarthritis included, whereas in moderate and high risk population, polyarthritis, monoarthritis, and polyarthralgia, all 3 comes under arthritis group. So in minor criteria, there are some differences. In low risk population, polyarthralgia is a minor criteria, whereas in a high risk population, polyarthralgia comes under major criteria. And in moderate and high risk population, monoarthralgia also is considered as a minor criteria. And fever, you can see in low risk population, the cutoff is 38.5, whereas in moderate and high risk population, cutoff is 38. And in low risk population, ESR cutoff is 60 mm in low risk population, whereas in moderate and high risk population, ESR cutoff is 30. CRP cutoff is same for both the people. And PR interval also, there is no difference between moderate and high risk. So if anyone asks you what the difference between low risk and high risk, you have to quote in major criteria arthritis group, and in minor criteria again arthralgia group, fever, and ESR. These 4 are the differences between low risk and high risk population, moderate and high risk population. So if you are including this ECG criteria in minor criteria, then you should not add carditis in major criteria. So, and vice versa. Like in carditis, you are taking as a major criteria, then PR interval should not include in minor criteria. They are given down its prolonged PR interval after accounting for age variability, unless carditis is the major criteria. So evidence. So we have seen like in for an initial ARF, at least two major plus one minor, at least two major or one major plus two minor, or with like initial ARF diagnosis requires two major or one major plus two minor with evidence of recent group A beta hemolytic streptococcus infection, whereas recurrent acute rheumatic fever requires two major or one major plus two minor or three minor criteria. So both, but for both initial and recurrent ARF, we definitely require a evidence of recent group A beta hemolytic streptococcus infection. For that, we are going to see raised or rising anti-streptolysin O titers. So 80 to 85% people will have positive throat culture for group A streptococcus, rapid streptococcal antigen test, anti-DNase B, anti-hyaluronidase with the ASO 95 to 100% we can elicit the evidence of recent group A beta hemolytic streptococcal infection, and history of recent scarlet fever should be there. Most clinical findings of rheumatic fever generally coincides with the peak anti-streptococcal antibody response, except Korea. Only one third will have history of group A streptococcal pharyngitis. Is it needed to be followed strictly? Three circumstances where ARF diagnosed without strict adherence to Jones criteria. Indolent carditis may be a sole manifestation. Chorea may be the sole manifestation. Like they are telling, like if indolent carditis or chorea are there, then we have to definitely think of ARF. Like in major criteria, if child is having chorea, then we can easily diagnose, we can directly diagnose ARF. We don't need to have two major or minor criteria. If indolent carditis, chorea is there, then we can directly diagnose acute rheumatic fever. Acute rheumatic fever recurrence may not fulfill the Jones criteria. That's why even three major criteria, so three minor criteria can be a recurrent ARF that we have seen before. So differential diagnosis for arthritis, carditis, and chorea we have to see. In arthritis, our disease is because of acute rheumatic fever. The other diseases which can manifest with arthritis or septic arthritis, connective tissue to other autoimmune diseases such as juvenile idiopathic arthritis, viral arthropathy, reactive arthropathy, Lyme's disease, sickle cell anemia, infective endocarditis, leukemia, lymphoma, gout and pseudogout, post-streptococcal reactive arthritis, enoxatorial purpura. In carditis group, like acute rheumatic fever can per se lead to carditis, and other congenital malformations which can present like carditis or physiological mitral regurgitation, mitral valve prolapse, myxomatosis mitral valve, fibroelastoma, congenital mitral valve disease, congenital aortic valve disease, infective endocarditis, cardiomyopathy, myocarditis, viral idiopathy, Kawasaki disease. Cardiomyopathy, myocarditis are acquired diseases, whereas these are congenital malformations. So chorea can be because of drug intoxication. One more disease which happens in school age children and starting of adolescence is the Wilson, which can also present with chorea, tick disorder, chorea thrice, cerebral palsy, encephalitis, familiar chorea, intracranial tumor, Lyme's disease, hormonal, metabolic, antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, SLE, systemic vasculitis, sarcoidosis, hypothyroidism. These can also present with chorea. So arthritis is the most common manifestation. 30 to 50% will have. Like large joint involvement is more common in acute rheumatic fever. This is the reason why it licks the joints, like heart rate swollen and executively tender. Why it licks the joint? It means at the episode of acute rheumatic fever will have pain, distress. But once the episode settles and child take medications, this arthritis will be completely cured without any sequelae. That's why it's just lick the joints. So hot, red swollen, and executively tender. Migratory polyarthritis is very characteristic of acute rheumatic fever, and then there will be a dramatic response to aspirin. And other, some of the joints are not involved by acute rheumatic fever. These are sacroiliac joint, temporomandibular joint, and cervical joints. And as I said, there won't be no permanent sequelae, and it resolves in 6 weeks. Since it doesn't have any permanent sequelae, that's why the term it licks the joints. So carditis. Carditis is seen in 50 to 60% of the patient, and there will be a tachycardia out of proportion to the fever, sleeping pulse rate raised, Usually there will be a pancreatitis. Pancreatitis is nothing but all three layers of the heart will be involved, like pericarditis, myocarditis, and endocarditis. So myocarditis and pericarditis without clinical evidence of endocarditis almost never is a rheumatic origin. So these we have to think of other viral infections other than this acute rheumatic fever, myocarditis or pericarditis without evidence of endocarditis. So isolated aortic or right side valvular involvement is quite uncommon. Most of the times it involves the mitral valves and aortic valves, but isolated aortic or right side valvular involvement is quite uncommon. Most of the times it will be along with the mitral valve. So pericarditis never occurs in isolation, as I said before, and there will be variable severity. Why it bites hard? Because involvement of the heart in the form of pancreatitis will always lead to a sequelae which is known as rheumatic heart disease. That's why it bites the heart and it won't damage the joints. That's why it licks the joints. So Sydenham's chorea, it's 10 to 15% of the patients longer latency. Females are more affected than males, usually delayed, often sole manifestation of acute rheumatic fever. It causes involuntary movements of the face and the limbs, incoordination, poor scholastic performance, emotional liability. This emotional liability point is very important. It can come along with this involuntary movements of the face and limbs many times. Uncontrollable movement in facial grimacing, exacerbated by stress and disrupted sleep, rarely leads to permanent neurological sequelae. Clinical manuals to elicit features of chorea are this very characteristic features are milkmaid's grip, irregular contractions of the muscles of the hand while squeezing the examiner's fingers, spooning and pronation of the hands when the patient's arms are extended, then Vitus dance, Vermian movements of the tongue upon protrusion, Jack in the box phenomenon, and handwriting to evaluate fine motor movements. So, other major manifestations like erythema marginatum, it occurs in less than 10% of the patients. It is a erythematous macular non-pruritic rash, serpiginous borders, raised edges, central clearing, most common on trunk, never seen on face, evanescent, warm, accentuate, evanescent, it is evanescent and warmth accentuates the lesion. So subcutaneous nodules seen around 5%, small pea size is 0.5 to 2 centimeters in diameter. It is firm, mobile, painless, seen over the extensor surfaces of the wrist, elbow, spine, usually seen in individuals with long-standing carditis. So subcutaneous nodule is the only good thing is like if a patient is having subcutaneous nodules, definitely the patient will be having carditis. So linked with carditis, polyarthritis is 50 to 75% associated with carditis. Subcutaneous nodules, as I said, more than 95% of the patients are associated with carditis. Chorea 60 to 75% carditis. So you can see this is arthritis, this is erythema marginatum. You can see like it's a erythematous macular lesion with the serpiginous borders, central clearing also is there, and it most commonly in the trunk. It won't involve the face. Here you can see subcutaneous nodules, small pea-size shaped subcutaneous nodules present. Most common areas are wrist, spine, elbows, occipital regions. Here you can see in elbow region. These are also subcutaneous nodules only. This one is for this Sydenham's chorea. This is for Sen Vitus dens, what I was discussing before. This you can see vegetations suggestive of, and then valvular damage suggestive of endocarditis. So management is bed rest and close monitoring for evidence of carditis, and then eradication of the streptococcus is very important. Anti-inflammatory therapy, treatment of congestive cardiac failure, treatment of chorea, and prevention of recurrences. Surgical, acute, and chronic. So treatment, antibiotic therapy, regardless of the throat culture result, antibiotic for treating the acute rheumatic fever, that episode, we have to give 10 days antibiotics. The antibiotics is penicillin G or B. G IV or we have to give. Penicillin B is oral antibiotic or amoxicillin to ensure eradication of the group A streptococcus from the upper respiratory tract, followed by secondary prophylaxis. So anti-inflammatory therapy you have to give in patients with arthritis and carditis. Aspirin dose typically is 50 to 70 mg per kg per day in 4 divided doses for 3 to 5 days, followed by 50 mg per kg per day in 4 divided doses for 2 to 3 weeks, and half the dose for another 2 to 4 weeks. So total duration will be there for 6 to 8 weeks you have to give aspirin in a tapering dose. Other anti-inflammatory therapy which can be used in acute rheumatic fever are naproxen and ibuprofen. Superior side effect profile is there with the ibuprofen. So in cases of carditis with minimal cardiomegaly or congestive cardiac failure, the patient has to receive corticosteroids, either dexamethasone or prednisolone. Most of the cases will be giving prednisolone 2 mg per kg per day in 4 divided doses for 2 to 3 weeks, followed by half the dose for 2 to 3 weeks, then tapering by 5 mg per 20 hour week every 2 to 3 days. So when prednisolone is being tapered, aspirin should be started 50 mg per kg per day in 4 divided to prevent rebound inflammation. So Sydenham's chorea treatment, anti-inflammatory agents usually not required. Anti-inflammatory agents is only for arthritis and carditis. So carditis with cardiomegaly and or congestive cardiac failure, we have to use steroids. But for Sydenham's chorea, treatment is phenobarbital, which is 16 to 32 mg TDS or QID oral. This is the drug of choice. Other drugs are haloperidol, 0.01 to 0.03 mg per kg per day. BD oral we have to give. Other drugs are chlorpromazine, 0.5 mg per kg every 4 to 6 hours oral. Some may have benefits with a few weeks of steroids. So primary prophylaxis, vulnerable children from primary prophylaxis is the one which prevents the development of acute rheumatic fever. Once the patient comes to you with the pharyngitis, at the time itself you are giving antibiotics and eradicating the group A streptococcus from the upper respiratory tract so that the child doesn't develop acute rheumatic fever. So oral drug, all these drugs can be given. Penicillin 200 to 500 mg BD or TDS 10 days you have to give. Erythromycin 20 to 40 mg per kg per day. TDS or QAD 10 days. First generation cephalosporin 10 days you can give. All these drugs are for primary prophylaxis. Penicillin, erythromycin, first generation cephalosporin, azithromycin. Parenteral drugs are less than 27 kg. You have to give single dose IM benzathine penicillin 6 lakh international units. More than 27 kg na, you have to give 1.2 million. 1.2 million international units. For less than 27 kg, it's just 0.6 million international units or 6 lakh. For more than 27 kg, it's 1.2 million or 12 lakh international units. Therapy instituted before 9 days of symptoms of acute pharyngitis. After that, it won't be much useful. Secondary prophylaxis. As you can see, for primary prophylaxis and the secondary prophylaxis, most of the thing will be same only. But in primary prophylaxis, in addition to this, you will be using azithromycin and first generation cephalosporin. Whereas in secondary prophylaxis, you will be using penicillins, erythromycin, and sulfadiazine. Here, azithromycin and first generation cephalosporins won't be there. So when to initiate a patient on a secondary prophylaxis? So duration of secondary prophylaxis. If a patient is coming to you with acute rheumatic fever, but there are no evidence of carditis, then you have to give only for 5 years or until 21 years of age, whichever is longer. If the patient is having carditis, but no residual heart disease, then you have to give 10 years or 21 years of age, whichever is longer. If a child is having acute rheumatic fever with carditis with residual heart disease, then you have to give the patient 10 years or until 40 years, whichever is longer. Sometimes lifelong therapy also is instituted. So recurrence, a new episode of rheumatic fever following another group A beta hemolytic streptococcus infection occurring after 8 weeks following stopping treatment. Then only you can call it as recurrence. Like you have treated a acute rheumatic fever after stopping your therapy. Like child will be on secondary prophylaxis, but all these anti-inflammatory drugs you would have stopped. After stopping this, after 8 weeks, if the child is coming again with a new episode of rheumatic fever, then only you have to call it as a recurrence. So recurrence in a patient without established heart disease, as I said before, there has to be 2 major or 1 minor and 2 minor. So 1 major and 2 minor or 3 minor criteria plus supportive evidence of previous streptococcal throat infection. So recurrence in a patient with established heart disease, there has to be 2 minor criteria and supportive evidence of previous streptococcal throat infection. You have to see very carefully. If a patient is not having heart disease, then you have to have at least 2 major or 1 major and 2 minor or 3 minor criteria. Whereas in a recurrence in a patient with established heart disease, only 2 minor is enough. So other terminology, rebound, manifestation of rheumatic fever occurring within 4 to 6 weeks of stopping treatment or while tapering drugs. Recurrence is the thing after stopping treatment, 8 weeks after the stopping treatment, if the patient develops a recurrence, the patient develops acute rheumatic fever, then it's called recurrence. But if the patient develops episode of rheumatic fever within 4 to 6 weeks or on tapering dose of drugs, then it's called a rebound. Relapse is worsening of rheumatic fever while under treatment. While full dose drugs, when the child is on full dose medications, the child develops a episode of rheumatic fever, then it's called a relapse. So rheumatic heart disease, it is the most common sequelae of acute rheumatic fever and the second most major manifestation. Mitral valve is the most commonly involved valve after aortic valve. Device to Jones criteria, subclinic carditis. So these are the Doppler findings in rheumatic valvulitis, like pathological mitral regurgitation. All four criteria should be met. Like revised to as you have seen in major criteria, the newer version of revised Jones, they have included subclinical carditis also in major criteria. Carditis has to be a clinical carditis or subclinical carditis. So diagnosis for the subclinical carditis comes from an echo, Doppler findings in a rheumatic valvulitis. So for a pathological mitral regurgitation, there has to be all four criteria met. The mitral regurgitation has to be seen in at least two views, and the jet length should be more than or equal to 2 centimeters in at least one view. Peak velocity should be more than 3 meters per second, and pansystolic jet in at least one envelope. So, pathological aortic regurgitation, all four criteria should be met, seen in at least two views. Jet length should be more than or equal to 1 centimeter at least one view. Peak velocity more than 3 meters per second. Pan-diastolic jet should be at least one view. As you can see, the pansystolic and the pan-diastolic view jet alone is the difference between these two pathological regurgitations. So manifestations, there will be valve deformities, thromboembolism, cardiac hemolytic anemia, and atrial arrhythmias. RSD lesions are MR, MS, AR, AS, TR, and multivalvular. In children, mostly you will be encountering mitral regurgitation and aortic regurgitation. So mitral insufficiency due to loss of valvular tissue and elongation of the cardiac. More than 50% of the patients in acute MI may not have murmur. Holosystolic murmur at apex radiates to the axilla. It is a heaving apical LV impulse, often with the systolic thrill. Carey-Coombs murmur is a very pathognomic. A short mid-diastolic rumbling murmur related to MS does not mean true MS. ECG may show bifid P waves, LVH and RVH pattern if pulmonary hypertension develops. Since mitral regurgitation is a volume overload condition, there will be a LVH. On top of that, there will be a left atrial dilatation also. Since there is a left atrial dilatation, the patient slowly will develop pulmonary venous hypertension, that leading to pulmonary arterial hypertension, and that leading to right ventricular hypertrophy. So mitral stenosis due to fibrosis of the mitral ring, commissural adhesions, and the contracture of valve leaflets. Chronic process takes more than 10 years. Exercise intolerance, dyspnea, orthopnea, PND, and overt pulmonary edema are some of the features of mitral stenosis. Atrial arrhythmia, hemoptysis due to rupture of the bronchial pleurohilar veins and occasional pulmonary infarction may also occur. So on examination, patient might have cardiomegaly, parasternal right ventricular lift if pulmonary artery pressure is high. Loud S1 and opening snap of mitral valve, what known as opening snap, and presystolic accentuation at the apex. So echola, elbow, or dog leg appearance of the anterior unit of mitral valve. So aortic insufficiency, it's mostly with the mitral valve involvement. Isolated aortic insufficiency is very uncommon. Palpitation, sweating, and heat in run due to excessive vasodilatation. Bounding peripheral pulses, Corrigan and Waterhammer pulse not seen with pulmonary insufficiency. Early diastolic murmur over the left upper and the mid external border. Austin Flint murmur and apical presystolic murmur also is. Unlike mitral insufficiency, aortic insufficiency does not generally regress. Surgery early symptoms are, if surgery should be done if early symptoms are present. ST-T wave changes are the decreased LV ejection fraction. So right side valvular involvement rare due to rheumatic fever itself. Tricuspid involvement mostly due to significant left-sided valvular lesions. Pulmonary valve disease occur mostly on a functional basis due to pulmonary hypertension. Late findings with severe MS, Graham's murmur is here. Multivalvular disease manifestation is usually that of the dominant lesion. However, the proximal valve lesion may modify the effects of the distal lesion. So indications of the surgery are as for the dominant lesion. So management, medical, prophylaxis against the recurrence of the rheumatic fever are important. I have already explained about that. Physical activity need not be restricted in most mild cases. Afterload reduction agents are very useful in cases of aortic regurgitation, are particularly useful in maintaining the forward cardiac output. If a child develops congestive heart failure, then you have to give anti-congestive therapy with diuretics and digoxin. Child develops atrial fibrillation, then digoxin is indicated to slow the ventricular response. So indications of valve surgery are symptomatic patients with NYHA functional class 3 and 4, asymptomatic patients with left ventricular systolic dysfunction, and surgery may be considered in patients with preserved left ventricle if the likelihood of successful repair without residual MR is great. So take home messages from this class is ARF is the most common acquired heart disease. RHD is its severe manifestation. Clinical judgment along with the applying criteria and early diagnosis is important. Initiating secondary prophylaxis as per guidelines decreases morbidity associated with long-term sequelae of hepatic fever. Thank you. There are any doubts? People can ask. Okay. Thank you.